Hey, Mike, nice to be with you again today.
And always wonderful to be with you. I'm excited to dive into another, what is it, episode 14 today?
I think we are at 14. Yeah, yeah, racking them up there.
Let's keep them rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's always fun to have these conversations, and we never quite know what's gonna come out of it when we start. Yeah, just for context, for those talking, we're talking for those watching, for those watching along today. Mike and I generally kind of just connect very briefly before we hit record here, and we contemplate what we're going to bring into the conversation, but we never know what's going to emerge. We just show up and see what happens naturally. So yeah, maybe just as a quick introduction, what we wanted to jam on today was this concept of space, of spaciousness, and how space and spaciousness might show up in our lives, and um, how we see it contributing to maybe even living a fuller kind of life, even though that sounds a little bit sort of counterintuitive. Yeah, just this concept of space. So as I just offer that to you, Mike, I'd love to know what comes up for you.
Yeah, one of the quick things that we were jamming on before we hit record was in the busy life of a business owner or an entrepreneur. A lot of times our schedule might be we wake up, we have a little routine, and then it's off to the races working all day. And we might sit in the question or the inquiry of how can I do more? There's other things that I want to do and I don't really have the time. Like what do I need to let go of to make that happen? And the counterintuitive move a lot of times is to give yourself, I don't know, it could be 30 minutes of space, it could be 5 minutes. But the thing that immediately comes up for me is giving yourself lots of space. Like I remember I listened to Seth Godin on a podcast, and there was a time in his life that I think he's written 20 books now. He's published 20 books or thereabouts. And book number, it was in like the 15 to 20 range. He was writing consistently. I think he's had a blog post every single day for something around 7,500 days in a row. I'm ballparking
Mm.
here. So the guy consistently shows up, and he was feeling stuck with one of his books. And instead of doubling down and saying, I need to write a little bit more, I need to, do 20 hours instead of 15 hours a week, he gave himself 5 days of agendaless. I'm just going to go unplug, be in the desert for 5 days by myself. Of course, like I'll have food and water and all my necessities, but no distractions at all. And I don't remember, like I'm certainly filling in lots of details, but what stood out to me from the story and the illustration is instead of what might seem like the initial response for most humans is I need to just double down, grind it, work harder. And he just put everything aside, and the spaciousness that he created allowed him to, if not finish the book, have the concrete idea of what it was that he wanted to create. So I think in big ways and small, a lot of times the best way for us to arrive at this insight that we might be hunting for, or the next chapter, or whatever the thing is that we're trying to create, if we stop and slow down and do nothing for a certain amount of time, it allows for there's an emergence that happens. And there's other examples that are coming up for me, but what's coming up for you as I say this?
I love that example that you use with Seth Godin and intentionally creating space, because again it sounds counterintuitive, and we generally think, oh, I need to change the strategy, maybe it's the way that I'm doing it, maybe I need to like tweak the routine or something. But really actually just coming back to a blank canvas can be really truly transformative. So I think just to highlight the paradox in that, and it's so funny, because I work with a lot of very successful clients, a lot of professionals, business owners, people who with these very four genders that you talk about. And just a little bracket as well. And success, it's a triggering word as well. We all have our own definitions of success, but yeah, they generally need to find some way to relax, right? But they find it really, really difficult when I say, okay, I want you to schedule an hour a week inside of your usual work window to just do nothing. It's like, no, like why would I do that? Like that doesn't make sense. I've got so much to do. Like I'm gonna have to sacrifice sleep or whatever it is. But it's just so interesting. I've never had somebody who's actually agreed to go away and do that and come back and tell me that was a waste of time. Never. It's always like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how much was just kind of sitting there, kind of floating around in my mind, just waiting to come up and have a little bit of airtime. And I think it's an interesting concept, because the other question I get a lot from clients or people who know what I do, know what my work is, and they go, oh, what do you think about meditation? And I'm like, well, it really depends. I mean, I think meditation is a great tool, but my question is, what are you doing it for? What is actually needed? And quite often what we need when we're reaching for something like meditation is actually a bit of space. Yes. So maybe meditation provides that, but maybe also a walk out in nature with no technology provides that. Maybe taking a bubble bath in the evening, one of these sort of cliche self-care things. But it's useful for that purpose, I think, for that creation of space. So it doesn't really matter what the tool is. It's like, what are you trying to do? It's this creating this container where something different can emerge. Because if we never really stop and create space, we don't tend to question what we're doing. We don't have room to go, oh, should it be me doing that? Should it even be done at all? Is this the top priority that should be looked at right now? So there's a lot of discernment that can also come up when we create space. So it's useful for so many different reasons. And yeah, it's really I think my top recommended intervention for people who feel like they're too busy, got too much on their plate, is create space really intentionally.
Yeah. There's a quote that I heard, I think Tim Ferriss introduced it, and it's something along the lines of, don't just do something, stand there. And that's in a lot of ways, that's what we are talking about. And there's another example, and that's coming up for me. I don't know if you've ever heard of or read the book Drive by Daniel Pink, but
no, I haven't. I've heard of Dan though. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the essence of the book is that we as humans, or I think a lot of workplaces operate under the assumption that if you dangle enough rewards and carrots and sticks in front of us, that we will keep chasing them if you give us enough money. But what really, given the operating system that we are in today as humans, we need to have intrinsic motivation as well as extrinsic motivation. As a matter of fact, we're more driven by internal, intrinsic motivation than external, whether or not we are conscious of it. And the reason I bring it up and introduce it into this conversation is there's an example in the book that he illustrates. There's two founders. They started a tech or engineering company. So it was very data-driven, process-driven. There's a way in which you think in a business like that, or like our background, accounting, law, that the billable hour is king. And if you are not, like, if you're leaving time on the table, then something's off. They introduced this concept of a day where the entire office had, once a year, the complete freedom to show up to the office. They were not allowed to work on any projects. They just had to brainstorm ideas that they had for the future. And they found that it was so successful that one day a year that they just had to keep creating more space and more space for it. And it became like they were working on their best projects from these times where they created the space, because it allowed us to, like, we have such a capacity as humans to create things in a way that a robot or AI can't. Like, that is the distinguishing factor of humans. We are creative. We can appreciate beauty and art. And I think that a lot of the ways that uh, companies work these days is we need to just be more like a computer instead of tapping into our humanity. And one of the ways to create more humanity is to have space for us to look inwards and be like, what's going on here? What's important to me? So I
Mhm.
think that that example perfectly illustrates, like, if you're that busy entrepreneur and you don't know how the heck you're going to make the next move in your life or where the time will come from, you make the move of just give yourself the time to do nothing and just see what emerges.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I love that. It's a great example. And I really just find my mind stuck on that idea that you bring up about how we keep trying to turn ourselves into more of a machine, right?
Yeah,
It's like we cast our humanity aside, our need to sleep, to eat right, get the adequate
to feel.
nutrition. Yeah, to feel, to receive the sunlight on our skin, whatever it is, we cast aside so many of those things that are just so essential for our human health, and as a result, our optimal function. So it really doesn't serve us at all to try and be a machine, right?
Mm.
Our competitive advantage is in not being a machine. Otherwise we become really replaceable. And so it's interesting when you zoom out and look at it like that. um, and there's a few sort of metaphysical things that start to come up for me here as well. I kind of like playing in that realm sometimes.
Mm.
And some people say that there's nothing new that's ever created. It's energy changing shape or form. But we also know, on the other hand, that the universe is constantly expanding, right? So if you look at those two things, it's like, okay, the universe is constantly expanding and nothing new is ever created. It's just a change in form. Well, how do things expand? And the thing that solves that is space, right? It's more space in between things. And that's how we create this expansion. So just to add something nice and fluffy, because for me, I love those kind of concepts. I think it's fun to feel into that. So, at the end of the day, it's physics that we're talking
Yeah.
about here. It's intentionally putting in that space to allow for the expansion. And I think it's what so many people kind of miss about the whole point of this human existence. It's really, space is an essential thing if we do want to expand and grow and be different to how we were yesterday.
Mm. A lot of high achievers, in my experience, they get to the point where all of the things have been accomplished and there's the element of, but there's something missing. And when I hear there's something missing, it's usually life is passing me by in some way.
Mm,
I'm not tapping into whatever you want to call it, my inner knowing, my intuition, my deeper wisdom. There's lots of things that we call it, but I think that we all have a drive to live from our own inner knowing in some way, shape, or form. And if we don't allow space, and space can mean a lot of things, like you said. So space might mean meditating, journaling, processing our feelings, having meaningful connection, walking outside in nature. If we're not doing those things, then there's lots of like repressed crap that gets stuck in us,
mm,
and then
mm,
we're out of nowhere, seemingly nowhere, we feel anxious and on edge and worried and like something's missing and like life is passing us by. And to just like slow down and breathe, there's so much that can emerge. This is a big edge for me too, but there's a way in which I think our society is very forward moving at all times. And it's like, okay, great thing happened. What's next? Instead
mm,
of slowing down to maybe appreciate the accomplishment, or if we're stuck, to really be in the stuckness.
mm,
In my experience, like when I allow myself to do that, which is still very much an edge and a learning opportunity for me, I just feel more available to do, to create, to be more productive. It's funny that it works that way.
absolutely. Yeah, and it goes back to that same mentality where we kind of treat ourselves like machines, right? It's like, let me just stuff
Mhm.
all this stuff into this convenient little box, and then all of a sudden we're aware that we have a problem, but we don't know what it is. And that's really frustrating when you think of yourself like a machine, because there's this desire to then want to fix, right? It's like, I'm anxious, so I'll fix it with something. Or maybe it might be a practice or a routine or a pill, or whatever it might be that we turn to, but we want to fix. And it's generally not the way to more peace, right? To approach it with that kind of fixing mentality. And it's something that shows up for me as well personally still. Sometimes I do have things that I really need to get done, but then I've got some sort of emotional experience that's going on at the same time. And it's like, I just wish my emotions would just like go away for a bit so I can just focus on doing this thing. But actually, it's what I really need to do is just take a bit of time to feel my feelings and then get back to doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
Because by pressing and forcing and pushing, it's just going to add that pressure to the emotion, and it's a form of judgment, right? And I always say to people, when we judge our emotions, what we do is we make them stronger. In essence, we add this sort of energetic to it that just makes it feel bigger again. So it's really not a productive thing to do, to try and sort of force it and press it down. It's precisely the moment to acknowledge our humanity and step away for a moment and move it through. And as you said, it might be doing something like journaling. It might be some sort of physical expression of an emotion, a way to sort of process something through. It might be using sound. It might just be taking a walk in the fresh air. But it's important that we all learn our own kind of way to move things through. And it does get easier. It happens, at least in my experience and what I see guiding my clients through these processes. It's hard at the start because it's like, oh, what do I do with this thing? But we all find our own way of moving it through efficiently. Sounding a bit like a machine again, talking about efficiency, but there is there is a way to kind of make that process a little bit smoother for ourselves. And I think that can give us a little bit of hope to keep actually looking at it, keep offering ourselves that invitation to kind of go into it instead of ignoring it and just going on to the next thing that we need to do.
Yeah. I think, now I'm reflecting on our backgrounds, both Anne, are in accounting, and as a data-driven person, I'm reflecting on like what got me to really start believing in the power of creating space, because I know that it took a while for me to be convinced of that. Like it seemed like everyone else was marching on, pressing forward, and we haven't even really gone into the neuroscience of just like how the brain works as well. And so I think, one of the early introductory things that got me to understand, what, Mike, like if you don't create space, your brain is not going to be working at its maximum capacity anyway, was doing a deeper dive on the brain and neuroscience. And the way the brain works is, well, in this way, we are kind of like a computer. You can't just have your computer running at all times, right? Like if we step away, we put it to sleep or we shut it down, and then the computer works in a more efficient way when we turn it back on. The brain's the same way. If you are just marching forward at one speed, it's not going to process things. It's not going to retain well. And I think another example, this has happened to me twice now, and like I had something and I lose it right when I was about to jump into it. Here's the example. In my accounting career, many times I've been really in a spreadsheet where it's like, I'm almost done with this work paper. I just need to keep marching forward a little bit. And I get stuck on, one formula is not adding up right, or I'm off like $1,000. I don't know what it is. And my tendency was always, let's just sit here until it gets done. And every single time, basically, if I took a step away, took a 5-minute walk and came back with fresh eyes, it's like, oh, the answer is pretty obvious. So the zooming out move is, even in small ways like that, just stepping away for a couple of minutes as a practice. Like I have a reminder on my phone, take a 2-minute break, that goes off, I think 10 times a day. And I listen to it basically no matter what. I'm going to stand up and do that, because I know that is my tendency will be to just stay at the computer and keep working if I don't build in that practice for myself.
Oh, I love that. It's a great example, and I can relate to it so strongly from my consulting days as well. I mean, the amount of hours I spent like sitting at my desk, I almost felt like I had my own foot in my back, just kind of making me stay there, like, you're not leaving until this is done. Just there's almost like this obsession. And at some point I had to peel myself away, right? Because the office is closing. It's like, okay, I'm going to get thrown out by security. And it was interesting because it was almost every time I would either it would be I'd get home after riding my bike home, and you know, moving a little bit of energy through my body, and I'd be like, oh, I know the answer, I know the creative solution for this, or waking up in the morning and like, oh, I know, you know, they're kind of excited to get to the office and get it down. But yeah, it's a challenge to actually like really, you know, and it is kind of force ourselves in the moment to just stop and let go, and just see what emerges in that space, because something will, right? And it's also important not to have expectations, right, on the specifics of it, but just allowing, just that process of just letting go. Set yourself a time limit. Like for you, it's 2 minutes. For me, maybe it was a good night's sleep. But it's really a beautiful thing. And you know, I find the same thing happens if I go for a really long walk. I think it was also Tim Ferriss that said there's nothing in his life that a 3-hour walk can't cure. And it might sound like a lot of time, but honestly, if you go for a walk somewhere with again, no technology in your ears, but just walking and just interfacing with whatever you come along your path, you'll be able to solve so many of the challenges that you had that you just felt like were impossible to solve. I had that experience a few weeks ago. I went for a fairly long walk, I think 10-12 kilometers through the Dutch countryside, and I had my phone with me, but really intentionally, you know, didn't put the usual podcasts on, just taking in the environment. And I had so many amazing ideas. At some point I also had to get my phone out and speak into it, but save these ideas for later, you know, make some little voice notes to myself to listen back to. And it was just amazing. It's like, wow, the level of creativity that's unleashed when we just allow that space. It's really beautiful to be able to witness that and experience that. And you know, again, it's really my number one tip for busy people, for people who find that they're a little bit short on time. Even if it's just something super, super small, just be really intentional about creating those moments of space where something unexpected can emerge.
Yeah. Yeah, in this moment, I'm really having a lot of compassion for just how hard it can be to create that space, because our brains are really like they're cooked on the addiction to the phone and the addiction to screens and the addiction to distractions. And I'm in touch with the part of me that at first, even taking a 1-minute walk outside without my phone or a podcast or music on, I felt like a part of, you know, like I felt, oh, that energy of like, got to do something. This is so boring. What's going on here? And yeah, I just have a lot of compassion for wherever, if you're that busy where it feels like taking a minute, which I've been that guy before, where if I didn't have music or a podcast or something happening at any given moment besides when I was sleeping, that something was wrong. Just start with whatever you can, and it's going to be uncomfortable at first, just like any change, right? Like if you're trying to correct a nutrition plan for yourself that you've been eating lots of cake and cookies every single day, your body is going to take some time to adjust to that. And eventually, on the other side of it, people have different timelines about habits, and I like to say in the ballpark of a month. If you're in the practice of doing something for a month, you're usually going to notice some sort of discernible shift after the end of that month. And it's just about creating what's the number, the time or whatever it is, like what can you do consistently for that month? And there's eventually an escape velocity of, instead of it being this thing that you're forcing yourself to do, you can realize, man, without space, I'm off my game. And the reward becomes inherent in and of itself, instead of this uncomfortable thing that's like, which I can really relate to.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that into the conversation as well, Mike. I think it's so important whenever we're creating any kind of intentional change, compassion is just such an essential ingredient, because our mind is gonna fight. It's undoubtable. And there's always that resistance, like, no, I can't do that, I can't do that. But yeah, as you said, baby steps, and just make it something that you decide to commit to and evaluate at the end of it. And you know, as I said, I'm fairly confident that after evaluating whether or not it's a good thing to have a little bit of extra space for your mind to just kind of swell and process and metabolize life, you know, it's going to be something that you're going to want to keep in there. I'm quite convinced of that. And I'd love to hear from anyone who has a different experience after trying it out for a little while, and maybe we can brainstorm something different. But I'd be very surprised. Very surprised. I think there's always so much gold to be found there when we really just leave space for ourselves to come through.
Yeah. In a personal example, it's been almost a year for me since I shifted from working in accounting full time and doing coaching as a side hustle to that now I work part time. I work 3 days a week in accounting and 2 days full time as a coach. When I first made that shift, the Thursday, Friday coaching days, what I had a few days where it was a blank calendar. And like I'm really in touch with just how much that irritated me and how I was so scared to transition into that. There was kind of that deep knowing that this is the right move for me at this juncture in my career, but I was like, what am I, my calendar is not full. What am I supposed to do? And I'm feeling called to maybe invite in, this could be a somatic practice that I do sometimes. Just look at a blank calendar and see what that evokes in your body. What do you notice that there's a desire for something or a movement, and to just breathe with that and sit with that can be really helpful. That's not what I did, but in hindsight, I would look at a blank calendar day and just say like, what's here? What's here right now? And what am I scared will happen if I do have a blank calendar? Because a lot of times we're avoiding something, and that's my invitation as we move more towards the back end of the conversation.
It's such a powerful invitation. It might sound like a subtle thing for people hearing that for the first time, but I notice just as you're talking about that, Mike, it sort of transports me back sort of viscerally to the time I actually took the full plunge into having 5 days a week. I went from working full time to having a full open calendar, and it was scary. It was scary. There's all these meaning making things going on in my mind, and if you have an empty calendar, then you're not contributing, you're not worthwhile, you don't matter anymore. All of these stories, all of these things that generally sort of just mulling around in the subconscious, and sometimes the space does allow those to come up, and that can be tough. And so it's a really legitimate thing to fear having space. And maybe fear sounds like a bit of an extreme word, but I know in my case it was fear. And so I think an embodiment practice like that, to really just have a look at that empty calendar and go, wow, can I just be with that? Can I just allocate that space just to being me and not needing to contribute anything materially or to be productive? Any of those things that we think we need to be a worthy member of society, perhaps. Again, to sound a little extreme, but I think that's probably going to touch something in people that can relate to this, that concept. So it's a beautiful invitation, and I think it could be something interesting for me to do as well now, as a little top-up practice. How does that feel? How does that feel?
And another question I'm sitting in is, when I was 4 years old, what did I do with space? Right? As children, we hadn't had the conditioning built in yet that we needed to be mechanistic, productive, to be worthy of having a life. And a lot of times when I am most stuck, it's because I'm not creating enough space for me to just be me, to play, to go shoot some hoops and do the things that I love doing without any anticipation of getting some sort of material reward. It just is inherent in thing that I'm doing or the way that I'm being, it's fun and it's enlivening. So I think a
Mm,
lot of our work as coaches is an invitation backwards, or like what matters to you, or what mattered to you
mhm.
when you were little, and how can we get in touch with that part of you?
Mm, beautiful. It's remembering, isn't it?
Yes.
Mm, mm. So we've got a few invitations to offer from our conversation today.
Mhm.
Create some intentional space, whether that's 5 minutes or whether it's a whole afternoon, whatever you can create, and evaluate if it's useful. Have a look at an empty agenda and see what that makes you feel, see what it brings up in you, and imagine what's possible in the context of an empty agenda. And 3, play. And maybe play is what you do inside of that space that you create. But I think that's always a beautiful and valid invitation for us adults that are in this kind of serious mode of big person life. Really just making that space for play, for creativity, even for boredom.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. So
Mhm.
lots of homework from this conversation. And yeah, I'd really love to invite anyone who listens along here and takes that invitation to create a little bit of space, to play, to be creative, to do whatever, just to be. We would love to know how that goes for you, and what emerges in that space, and what's really landed from this conversation.
Mhm. Beautiful summation, and as I listen to you summarize, I'm sitting in, yeah, Mike needs a little bit more play too. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a saying that we teach what we most need to learn, and I certainly get stuck around being the younger, more playful, more joyful version of me. So
Mm-hmm.
let's all
Yeah,
do that, folks.
let's
Let's
do it.
tap into that.
Let's do it. I'm committing to that too.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll wrap up there, but thanks everyone for watching along. Thank you, Mike, as always, for bringing your whole heart to these conversations.
Mm.
It's always a pleasure to jam.
Always a pleasure, Anne, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Lots of love.
Yeah, lots of love. Speak soon.